Good night, itchy eyes. Good night, sudden sneeze. Good night to your symptoms of allergies. Xyzal is the allergy medicine you take before bed. It provides powerful relief while you rest your head. Not just all night, but all the next day. Xyzal keeps working, keeping allergies at bay. And without those annoying symptoms disturbing your rest, you can wake up the next morning feeling your absolute best. Remember, be wise all, take Xyzal. At night.
Hey everyone, it's Dawnie. The following is a free teaser of our latest member bonus episode. If you like what you're hearing and would like to listen to the whole thing, become an Ursa member today in Apple Podcasts or by going to ursastory.com/join. You'll help support our show and you'll get access to our entire archive of member exclusives. That's ursastory.com/join. Thanks for listening. Hi, Deesha.
Hi, Dawnie.
And welcome, friends, to Ursa Short Fiction, the podcast where we geek out on our favorite short stories and writers. I'm Dawnie Walton, author of the final revival of Opal and Nev.
And I'm Deesha Philyaw, author of The Secret Lives of Church Ladies.
As always, this show is produced with support from you. Become an Ursa member today by going to ursastory.com/join. You'll get exclusive bonus episodes, and you'll help fund future stories and conversations, including today's bonus episode. As a special treat for our members, we're going to answer some burning questions about the book business, the craft of getting down to work, and whatever else is on our minds. Deesha, what are you thinking about these days?
Books, and more books. I'm judging, I think right now, like 3 or 4 different contests. I mean, they're all in different stages, right? So not all at once. But I'm up to my eyeballs in books. I actually have 4 little stacks of books on the back of my couch right now.
Wow.
I know what I'm reading. What are you reading these days, Dawnie?
Okay, well, first of all, right now, and I have it right here in front of me, I am reading National Book Award winner James by Percival Everett.
Yes.
Which is, I am ashamed to say, this is the first Percival Everett that I have read, although I have a couple of his books on my shelf. Mm-hmm. I am about 100 pages into this one, and I am really loving it. And what's so surprising about it is it's just he writes in such an approachable and simple style. And I feel like it's like deceptively simple. Like I want to go back and
very much so.
But I'm enjoying it very much. But the book that I also really want to talk about is written by his wife, Danzy Senna, which I read at the end of last year.
Yes.
Called Colored Television. Mm-hmm. Which is a satire in its own right about the television industry and about what Danzy Senna herself terms mulattoes.
Yes.
And I was listening to an interview that she did on the Stacks and talking about why she prefers that word and actually likes to use that word is because it is very specific to being mixed race, black and white.
Yes.
It's just like
it's not biracial.
Exactly. And that novel, which I actually did on audio, was just really funny and kind of like twisted and really interesting. And I kept like thinking about who the people in real life are that she's skewering in the novel.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I heard some tea about who the producer guy who, she's supposed to be co-writing a TV show with, or the character is. But thank you, Menopause. I've forgotten who it was, so I can't gossip now. Okay. I just can't even remember who it was supposed to be skewering, but it was hilarious. I didn't think about listening on audiobook. Is she reading it or someone else reading it?
No, it's someone else.
Okay.
But they do a very good job. Yeah.
Okay. No, I read it the old-fashioned way, and we love a messy Black woman protagonist, or messy women in general. But I loved it. I mean, everything from them drinking the wine, they're house sitting and they keep drinking expensive wine. I was feeling so upset every time they popped the bottle. I was like, stop that. Stop. Don't do it. You're only making. And it was just I love a story where the character just makes things worse and worse, and I can't stop reading and still sort of rooting for them being terrible at the same time.
I know, because it's like, oh, it's just become such a page turner in that way. Because it's like, girl, this is all going to explode spectacularly in your face. Like, it was a great book. And I just have to shout out Danzy Senna, of whom I've been a fan for a very, very long time, since her first novel, Caucasia. She's so versatile. She writes in so many different styles. She writes short fiction as well. That is really brilliant. And I actually, at the time that I was applying to grad schools, I applied specifically to UC Irvine because she was teaching there at the time.
Wow.
So I'm a huge stan of Danzy Senna. So I was very excited for her to have a new book out last year. And there's a novel, both of us are sort of reading stuff that isn't out yet. And there's a novel coming out. I'm not sure what year it's coming out, but I think 2027 actually. But it's going to be one to watch for. It's called The Seven Daughters of Dupree. And it's by our good sis, Nikesha Elise Williams, fellow podcaster. Deesha, can you give us some thoughts on that one?
Yes, this is a family saga, so right away, mess. And there are multiple perspectives ranging from the, I want to say, 1830s all the way to the present day. So we're talking about the seven daughters, 7 generations of women in this family from, the era of slavery to the present. And I am always in awe of writers who can manage all of those perspectives, still have a coherent narrative. And you're talking about, language and setting for more than 200 years or nearly 200 years. And, she nails the period details. The writers speak with, these are Black folks. And so she's got enslaved Black folks. She's got the folks who are enslaving. She's got free Black folks. She's got folks, Black women who own salons in the present moment, and all of I just love the language and the dialogue and how she nailed that. So you know that this book is heavily researched, but it's seamless in that way where you don't see the research on the page. Have you ever read a novel like that?
Oh, yeah.
You're like, I know you were in the stacks and you were at the microfiche machine and you pull that factoid and just plunked it into the novel. Well, Nikesha just blends it all so beautifully. And I learned so much as well. Like, I sometimes approach novels that are set during the era of enslavement and a little weary,
right.
and I lately have been pleasantly surprised, by this novel. And I also recently reviewed Charmaine Wilkerson's follow-up to, well, it's not a follow-up, but it's her sophomore novel after Black Cake. It's called Good Dirt.
Right.
And it like Nikesha's book, it starts from actually the 1700s, I think, all the way to the present day. And so again, I had this sort of tension in my body as I was going into it. And it's like, okay, no, this is much more expansive. And it's still, because you start to feel like, with slavery novels, as people say, kind of dismissively, like it's the same old. And something that both Good Dirt and the Seven Daughters of Dupree do is they take us in to either characters in a world during that time that we don't see a lot of in literature. So in the case of Good Dirt, instead of it being an agricultural setting, the people who during the chapters that are set in the past, they're craftspeople, they're potters, for example. And then in the Seven Daughters of Dupree, our focus, the main character, one of the central characters, I should say, she's a midwife. And so she brings the babies. And so there's, that dynamic. You have folks who, after enslavement, after emancipation, they own land and, sort of navigating life with the white folks and then other Black people who are now working their land. And that was fresh for me. And then on top of it, Nikesha has this incredible story of mothers and daughters, secrets, lies, betrayals, trauma. And gosh, I feel like I've rambled. Let me give you a chance to talk.
No, I mean, I feel all of that in this book. I, like you, was blown away by how it is so masterfully structured. It was really instructional for me in that way because I'm sort of working on some structure issues in my second novel. And, not to give like any, I don't know if it's a spoiler to talk about how a book is structured, but it's very interesting that like the first section of this book is questions, is sort of like raising all the things that are going to be issues and like things the characters are wondering about various things in the first part. And the second part is answers, you know, and it's just like, wow, that's brilliant. That's such a great way to do it when you have all these characters, all these timelines weaving in and out like a braid. It's a really wonderful book, and it put me in mind of Homegoing. So if anyone who loved Homegoing and the way it sort of treks down the generations and kind of has that wide, epic swath of time, it's a great one coming. Yeah.
And you know what? She borrowed that from that quote from Zora Neale Hurston. I think it's from Their Eyes Are Watching God, which is, there are years that ask questions and there are years that answer.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know that, of course, when I saw the first section that said questions. And then when I saw the section that answered, I was like, oh, that's what she's doing that. And then, of course, you have the answers. And I guess the last part might have been the epilogue or something else. But it's like there are characters who want answers. And as readers, the way Nikesha has teed up these mysteries and secrets, you want the answers, but then that doesn't solve everything. There's just like more complications that come. And yes, just the way she structured that, it was just so yummy. There was so much depth.
And I just also want to say about Nikesha as a writer, I think her story is just like hugely inspirational. This is her big 5 debut, but she has self-published novels in the past. And she is now making this transition, and we are so thrilled for her. So be on the lookout for that one, The Seven Daughters of Dupree.
Yes, and she's our podcast sister, too. Her podcast, Black and Published, is such a friend to those of us who are trying to get our books out in the world. She was one of the first podcasts. Hers was one of the first to host me when Church Ladies came out. So I'll forever be grateful. And she is our Duval homegirl.
Yes, yes. I think we've both been interviewed by her in Jacksonville. Yeah, yeah. So great. And I want to shout out for a second a book that I read by someone, Black woman working in publishing as a publicist for Dutton. So she actually worked with our brother Mateo Escarapor. Lauren Morrow, her novel called Little Movements is coming out in 2026. And it's a really smart and surprising novel. It's about a Black dancer and choreographer. And she goes on a residency in this very, very small, very, very white Vermont town. And she's sort of been challenged to put on this show at the end of her residency. And she kind of finds herself under some pressures that feel all at once familiar and enraging as a Black person. I'm kind of thinking it's sort of the perfect satire for our post-DEI moment.
Okay.
So I'm really excited about that one. Again, it's Little Movements by Lauren Morrow.
And I'm here for the satire and the humor writing by Black women. Colored television was hilarious.
It was so funny.
Now I got to add Lauren's book to my TBR, my toppling TBR pile, because I love it when our books are beautiful and funny and also serious. Tackling serious topics.
Of course, and there's some really touching, sad, dark moments in this, but there are also some LOLs. In this.
Love that.
Yeah.
So I also want to shout out a book that I have an advanced copy of by my dear friend of, 20 years now, Lanae O'Neill. And the title is Bib Country, Unearthing My Family Secrets of Land, Legacy, and Lettuce. So think Bib lettuce. Lanae's people they're descended from the Kentucky Bib family of that, known for that gourmet lettuce. And the book came about after Lanae wrote an article for Anscape, where she is, I think, a senior writer at Anscape. She was a veteran journalist at the Washington Post for many years, and then she went to, when it was called ESPN's The Undefeated, before the name was changed to Anscape. And so she's been there for a while now. And I remember this article several years ago where the descendants of the Bibb family, the white descendants and the Black descendants, had a reunion on one of the properties. And the article was about that and the weight of that reunion and the weight of history and legacy and, confronting the descendants of the people who enslaved your ancestors, and the essay was really beautiful and powerful, and it became a book. And so this book is part memoir, it's food history, and it's also cultural critique. And Lanae is just a fabulous person and a fabulous writer. I first met her virtually when I was writing for Literary Mama in the early mid-2000s. And Literary Mama had a interview column and they are also book reviews, books by writers who are mothers. And I would always seek out, are there any mother writers who are Black? And then I would interview them and review their books. And so Lanae's first book is called I'm Every Woman, Remixed Tales of Marriage, Work, and Motherhood. And Dawnie, you totally missed the mommy wars, thank God, by 20 years. But
what is that?
Oh my God, the mommy wars, it was during the first blogging era. And you remember there were a lot of mommy blogs.
Yeah.
And it was really fake wars, right? Where there was this idea that kind of pit educated mothers who stayed home with their children against mothers who chose to work outside of the home.
How antiquated. What the hell?
Right. And as you can imagine, it was really fake, right? Because, I wrote about this in Bitch magazine called Ain't I a Mommy? Because guess who wasn't involved in the mommy wars?
Right.
Black mothers, right? We've always worked, right? And even for white women, it was the problem, quote unquote problem, was overstated because more than 75% of all women work because they have to. It's not a choice. Right.
Right.
And there was not, people don't really have time to be fighting online about what another woman is doing. I mean, yes, okay, the breastfeeding, don't breastfeeding, the work at home, don't work. But the problem was overstated such that there were books being sold about the choice to stay home versus work. And these writers were getting on the morning shows. And so when I was researching for my article, why aren't Black women writing these books, right? Because, some of us are staying home. All of us are working. Why aren't we in it? It's we're not even in the conversation, right? Because if you start talking about women and mothers and work, you got to talk about slavery, right? Because, we've always worked and taken care of our kids and theirs.
Right.
Or how did white women move out of the home into the workforce in large number, middle class and upper class white women, I should say. They did it because then Black women worked and were underpaid, taking care of their families. And at the expense of their families back home and their communities back home. And so, but of course, that was never part of the mommy wars conversation, because that's not interesting, right? And we're not mothers. When people think mother, the universal mother is a white woman. And so the mommy wars just really inflamed this, and the problem was overstated. I did my research on some of the books that came out. They sold some of them no more than 4,000, 5,000 copies. And yet they were getting all of this press, national...
Massive deals, probably.
Yeah. I don't know if they got massive deals, but they definitely got on Good Morning America and the Today Show to talk about this raging problem. So Lanae, at the time that was happening, she was working, as I mentioned, at the Washington Post as a journalist, and she was just bone tired. And she had been talking to another mother writer who had said something about the mommy wars, and she was like, what is that? Meanwhile, she's living this whole question of trying to balance work and family and motherhood, and how do we balance that? And so it's a whole different conversation for Black women. And so she had that conversation with a friend and realized she didn't even know what this was. And then she fell asleep in her driveway one night, bone tired from work. She was so tired she couldn't even get out of the car. And she was like, work means something different for us. And so she wrote this book that looked at the history of motherhood, marriage, and work through Black women's experience in this country, starting with enslavement. And she talked about how, you can't have conversations about women and work, or women and the work-life balance without including Black women. And she said it's not because we have all the answers. She said, it's because we've sat with the questions longer. And that always, stuck out to me. And the other thing from this amazing book was she talked about how after emancipation, before we had Jim Crow, we had what's called the Black Codes in the South. And because right after emancipation, what Black families often did was for the mothers to be at home with the children and the men out in the fields.
Right.
The Black Codes that lasted like a hot minute. The Black Codes made it illegal for Black women not to work in the fields after slavery. And so, it's that history. It's the history of, how Black women made it possible for white women to enter the labor force in large numbers in the 60s and 70s for the first time that's left out of the conversation. And it's like, we are the conversation. And so now Lanae is back with Bib Country, which is also a very personal narrative that is also a cultural critique.
Well, I'm excited about that one. And I actually think Lanae and I overlapped for a hot minute when I was at the Washington Post. So I'm very excited for this book. It's very small world, very small world. Thanks for listening to this sneak preview of our latest member bonus episode. To hear the rest of it, become an Ursa member in Apple Podcasts or by going to ursastory.com/join.